Please listen carefully.
Hi, I'm Paul Fields.
And I'm Dave Guzman.
And this is Practical Bass, where each week we take a topic of interest to you, the working bass player, and we dissect it and look at it from a few different angles and hopefully pass on some knowledge that helps you, the working bass player, take your gigs and your gear to the next level. That is our mission here. That is our mantra. And we do love to hear from you about what you've picked up from the podcast or in other places. If you have suggestions, if you have feedback of any kind, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach us at the website, practicalbass.com, but you can also email us directly at podcast@practicalbass.com. And Dave and I pick up the mail there regularly, and we love to hear from listeners. We also hope that you'll share this with folks. You can find it everywhere that podcasts can be found, and we hope that that you'll subscribe and share this with your musician friends. Today we have an interesting topic, I think, which is something that is not just for bass players, but is definitely on the very, very practical side. Would you not say that, Dave?
Super practical.
Yeah. So what are we going to talk about?
We're talking about quick and dirty ways of getting a demo recording.
Right. So, wherever your level is at, right? We're probably talking more to the folks here who are less, making their living playing bass, but people who are working in kind of the semi-professional, amateur, and beginner segments of our audience. But whoever you are, you're probably in a position or have been in a position where you need to record your band for a demo. Right? Or it may be just an ensemble that you got. Maybe it's just a piano and bass duet. Who knows? Right? It can be all sorts of different configurations that you're working with, right?
But very practical because it's almost necessary if you want to book the gig.
Yeah. People want to hear you, right? And if they haven't been to see you at a gig, how do you break through? Well, a lot of times people will want a demo of the band. And typically what they're looking for is not something that is studio polished,
right? But
something that really shows how the band works together in a live environment.
Right.
Nowadays it's often the case that people can do live recordings at some of the better gigs. But, let's face it, when you're out there at a lot of the places where I'm sure, many of our kind of amateur and semi-pro listeners play, you're kind of contending with whatever the PA gear is there. You don't know whether people are going to be able to do that kind of recording. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
So what are some ways that you can do this yourself? What are a couple scenarios that we could go with here to divide this up? Because this feels like a very, very large topic, right? Because you could go from like super cheap, garage style, just like punk rock it out.
Yep.
All the way up to,
going to LA.
High quality of like, let's all get in a, studio, a real studio room together and just, play it out.
Yeah. Well, I think that the way to approach it is that we can look at it in a way where if you're starting from square one, if we look at just recording from a single mic place, right? Like one mic, one input. We'll use that as a starting point and then look at it as maybe two or multiple mics.
Yeah.
Right. So we start to expand what that sound looks like.
Yeah.
The budget increases a little bit more complex.
Yeah.
And then we can even dive into some of the more like multi-tracking methods.
Right.
And kind of patch it out that way, which, that'll get a little bit more complex. But I think that feels like a natural path, or at least like that was my experience.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's the path that a lot of musicians take. And, I think the key here is that we're going to tell you about one way or, several ways really that this can be done. But really these are just kind of picking out, we're kind of picking out points in a spectrum.
Yeah.
And these aren't the only ways that you could do it, right? There are all sorts of ways in between. I mean, essentially we could probably do, an episode per that would be about
Right.
15 different ways of doing a
Right.
demo, right? You could stretch it out as much as you want.
Yeah.
I think what we're kind of focusing on is here are some immediate low cost ways to do it. I have a feeling
Yeah.
that, we're probably going to end up, this may end up being a pretty big discussion. So, when we get to the end of the spectrum that is more about like where you're doing a lot of prep and there's a lot more equipment involved, that starts to look much more complex.
Yeah.
So we'll have some room for that discussion as well, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And if anything, it's just these are just points of discussion where as you get into it, at that point when you know which direction you want to go,
Yeah.
then there's Google.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. You can dig into like specifics within those areas. But
Right.
Cool.
So you can really, the thing about this spectrum is you can really start simple. And, as you become more experienced, as you get more comfortable with the gear, with the technology and how to do these things, you can kind of move on
Yep.
from there, right? As you go. And that's one of the nice things about doing recording is you can kind of start with, what do you have right now, right?
Yep.
And I think the main thing that you need to have, I mean, if you're going to be doing recordings, I mean, let's face it, the one thing you can't do without is a microphone.
Right.
You need a microphone to start out. And so if you take that very beginning step is really about one microphone.
Right.
And this is probably a good time to talk about the difference between a couple different types of microphones,
Yeah.
because some of them are great for certain kinds of performance and recording, and then they may not be as good for, broad, multiple sound sources for recording, right? And so let me try and get more specific so people will understand what we're talking about. Like probably one of the most famous iconic types of mics that people will have out there is like a Shure SM57 or 58. And you'll find other types of microphones like that, right? Like,
Yeah.
maybe you have an AKG, D5 or something like that, or a Samson, like an S11 or a Q3 or something like that. There are all these mics that are basically like the same kind of mic. They're built for you to put up on a stand and, use them for vocals and whatnot.
Yep.
Those are dynamic microphones, and they typically are used for single sources of sound
Right.
that are going to be fairly close to the microphone.
Yep.
And they're going to be heard, they're going to be heard extremely well by the microphone.
Right.
But they drop off really quickly as you move away from the mic.
Right.
Their ability to respond goes away really quickly. So those mics don't do so well. Like if you're trying to sing into one of those mics from like 2 feet away, they don't tend to work that well.
Right.
Unless you are incredibly loud as a singer. Right?
Yeah.
I would advise that, singers probably would not want to be that loud.
Right.
It'd be really hard on their voices.
Right.
So those mics are made for you to be fairly up close, anywhere from like right up on it to maybe, 6-8 inches away.
Yep.
That's kind of their range. There's another kind of microphone called a condenser microphone. And these are made with very, very large, what they call diaphragms. And they're just what they sound like, right? They're kind of a skin or a surface that's stretched, usually across like a circular panel. Not always, but usually like a circular panel. And it's kind of stretched like that to keep it tight. And they respond really well to all the sound that they hear around them, just like your ears do.
Right.
Right. So they're a little different than dynamic mics because just like you hear, you can hear a pin drop in the, unless your hearing is really bad.
Right. Yeah.
of
I might
abuse.
not be able to actually.
I'm not sure I would
Yeah.
either.
Yeah.
But, you can hear things in a room around you, even if they're not right up next to you, right? Like those little sounds that make you go, they scare
Right.
you after you're watching
Yeah.
a scary movie or something.
Ah. Ooh. Thanks, hearing. Thanks, man.
That's more like that's more like a condenser microphone. So I
Right.
think, the point of talking about those two kinds of mics is that, these mics are going to be the things that you're going to make a recording with.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, there's another point, which is the mic needs to go into something of some sort, right?
Yeah.
To basically pull the signal from the microphone
Yep.
and bring it up to a level that you can then run into like a computer or a tape machine or whatever it is that you happen to have. More than likely it's a computer, though,
Right.
nowadays. So a lot of times that'll be like you might have a little mixer, right?
Yep.
Those are perfect. You have an XLR cable, right? These are these
Yep.
kind of fat-ended 3-pin or 3-hole configurations that you plug into the mic on one side, you plug them into the mixer on the other, and that gets your signal from the mic to the mixer.
Right.
The mixer has a little preamp in it, and that will get the signal to where it needs to be. And then you have that mixer you're going to run into, you know, maybe it might be a USB mixer, and you
Right.
just plug it into your computer and you're ready to
Yep.
go, right? Or you might run that mixer into some sort of recording device, like an interface, and then
Yep.
the interface is connected to your
Right.
computer. Alternately, if you have like something older, maybe you've got like a tape deck or something like that, you could run the mixer into the tape deck and do the recording that way.
Yep.
So, you know,
That's kind of hip, actually.
there's probably some lo-fi folks out there.
Yeah.
There's, I mean, I will never, I mean, I had my first 4-track recorder. I had a multi-track, like you know, something for making music, and it was like a 4-track cassette recorder.
Yeah.
It was a Yamaha, and I loved it. It was great.
That's cool.
And that's how I kind of first got started. But, you know, again, you don't need necessarily all that equipment, but
Yeah.
you are going to need something to get, you know, from the microphone to a computer. Now, I will say you can even go simpler than that. So one idea is to have a mic, like there's a one I'm thinking of in particular, by Blue. It's called a Snowball, and
Right.
you literally run a cord from the microphone right into the computer. It's just a USB microphone.
Yep.
Boom, you're ready to go.
That's right.
One and done.
Yep.
Right. So that's a really, really easy way to do it. And again, you know, the thing about the single mic is, you know, you probably, if you are going to be recording a group, you want to make sure that the mic can get all of your sound.
Right.
Like, I don't know, have you done like one mic demos before? Like, what did you end up doing when you did a one mic?
Yeah, my investment, I want to say, is right around $100,
Yeah.
and I went with the Zoom recorder that has
yeah.
and it has the 4-channel option, so you can actually put it, you know, in the middle of the room. It'll capture everybody, or in a direction you can kind of focus it. It'll give you different options as to
Yeah.
like what direction you want the mic to catch, and to what degree.
Yeah.
And the quality's good, and it goes all onto a little, like, what do you call those little memory cards?
Yeah, like an SD card or something.
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
the same ones you put in cameras. And
You
stuff.
got it. Yeah. And there's a bunch of space on it just for that.
Yeah.
And that's where my starting point was. And actually, I used it just because I was using them not for demos so much as to capture live recordings,
Right.
so that I could take notes of things that were going right or that were going wrong.
Right.
And then I could also use it as a demo.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you know, I think you hit on something really important there, which is that, you know, the Zooms, a lot of them, you can adjust how directional they are. And like one of the
Right.
settings is like omni
Yep.
directional, which basically means like, hey, I'm going to pick up anything around me, whatever
Yep.
it is. And those end up being pretty good for doing like one source, you know, that one and done kind
Right.
of recording. And then you can take that card and slap it in your computer and use it.
Yep.
The way, I guess that the way to use those, or one of the things to think about is, you know, making sure that you get the right balance of instruments, and
Right.
you know, you're going to have to experiment to kind of figure out where that is, right? Because if you put that thing like really close to the drums, but then, you know, the vocalists are over on the other side of the room, or everybody's facing the other way with their guitar amps,
Yeah.
you're going to get a lot of drums and not much else.
Yeah. And depending on like what that mic is picking up, because whatever you're buying, if it is on a budget, it may have some strengths, it may have some weaknesses.
Yes.
And if it's very like boomy and muddy in general from coming in, you just want to make sure that you're kind of like guiding it toward the higher end stuff so that you are picking up if it's vocals that you want to kind of, be on that high end.
Yeah. What I typically recommend for folks is if you're going to be recording like this, have really long guitar chords, like from your bass, say, to your amp, have a really long cable. And the reason that you want that is like, then you can kind of like pick up the Zoom or whatever, pick up the mic and go around the room and listen to what's going on. Right.
Yeah.
Take the mic with you or the Zoom with you or whatever, move around the room, go to a space and kind of, you really have to listen, set the thing down and, play a number with the band and see what you're hearing. Right. And one thing to be careful of is this is where you want to think about like, how loud are we rehearsing or how loud are we playing in here? And remember that, if it feels like, if it's really loud and blown out in that room, I mean, it's cool to rock out and everything. But the thing is if you're rocking out at show volume in a little room with one of these things, it's not going to come out well.
Right.
Like the mics will just be overloaded. So you have to get things down to a reasonable volume. And then, again, kind of position yourself where you feel like things are balanced. And then if you put the mic there, things are going to be pretty good, right? So you got to listen, use your ears as a substitute microphone, essentially.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. So then if you can find a place where things are balanced out, okay, like you can hear the vocals above the music, the instruments seem like they're mixed well, like the bass is about as loud as the kick drum is.
Yeah.
And, the guitars are not so loud that you can't hear the singer if you have one, right? And again, we're kind of making some assumptions, right? I mean, because maybe you don't have all that. Maybe it's like an instrumental, you're doing like instrumental kind of like grindcore or something like that. So you may have a particular kind of sound you're looking for.
Sure.
The main thing is just, use your ears to determine does this sound like I would expect to want to hear a recorded band. And if it's similar, you're good, right?
Right.
Put your mic up and get going.
That's right. And all of this, I think, is with the thought, especially when we're, approaching this from a practical bass standpoint, it's that you as a bassist or as a musician are the one that's taking ownership of making this happen.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, then the right thing to do is also to make sure that you're given the space with your bandmates that you can, trial and error, make sure that you have enough time to work through this stuff.
Yeah.
Like just throwing a mic up and then hitting go and then not sort of looking back at it at all.
Yeah.
You're going to end up with something that's whatever it is.
Yeah.
You won't even know if it's good or bad or if it could have been better because it just is what it is.
Yeah.
Versus blocking the time out where you could say, if you have quick playback ability, record a couple of spots where the mic can be placed.
Yeah.
Then say, okay, guys, take a 15-minute break. Then go to your computer, play it back, spot 1, spot 2, 3, or 4, and then you can figure out, which one sounds the best.
Oh, yeah. Such a good point. Yeah. The idea being like, the thing about making a quick and dirty recording like this is, you're not paying really for your time.
Right.
It's how much time you want to put into it. So
right.
Yeah, definitely. Like try recording different places around the room, make a note as to which one, okay, at 10 minutes in, I moved the mic over to this area.
Right.
Like, just make yourself a little note about it.
Yep.
At, 15 minutes, we tried the song again and I put the mic over here and then compare them and see which one's,
right.
The one that you can live with. Right.
Yeah.
I think, one other thing I guess we didn't talk about is, with the Zoom, it's easy. You got this little card.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe if you've got like an omnidirectional mic that plugs right into a computer, that's easy too. But, what do you record into? And I would say, well, if you're a Mac person, GarageBand is the
right.
least expensive and easiest way to go. It's built in, you're not going to pay anything for it. All you have to do is just, select the mic as the input. and hit record on the computer
Yeah.
and go to town. Or if you have that Zoom, right, you pull that card out, you can take the audio tracks, or I should say audio track, maybe
Right.
it's on the card, because it might be one or it might be two if it's stereo.
Right.
And then you can pull those into GarageBand, like you can load them in
Right.
from that, from that card.
Yes.
And if it's not that, there are other things out there that are free. Reaper, I know, is one that you like a lot, right?
Yep. I use Reaper.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is a free, fully featured digital audio workstation
Yep.
that you can use. You can pull your tracks in there,
Yeah.
and you can even do some, maybe a little bit of sweetening. Like if the bottom is a little boomy, you might be able to pull a little bit of that out.
Yeah.
With an EQ. There's only so much you can do. You want your recording to be as good as it can be, but within reason. Remember,
Right.
this is a quick and dirty demo.
That's right.
Right. So,
Yeah.
within reason, you can do some interesting things to it.
Yeah. A little bit of editing will certainly feel dramatic.
Exactly.
It'll feel dramatic.
And there are some others out there that are similar, right? Similarly, no pay things, right? Like if you have a Windows machine, you have sound recorder that's built in. You could record direct into that from a microphone if you need to. A couple other things that are out there. I think Pro Tools First. So if you want to get into, what the pros use, you can, download Pro Tools First for free. It has a limit on number of tracks, but again, same deal. It's, if you're only doing, like one or two tracks or something like that, it's just as easy as anything else.
Yeah. And it's a matter of how you have to be honest with yourself as far as how much time you want to invest in it and how technologically savvy you are. Like if you feel like you have difficulty using Microsoft Word, then maybe like just stick with what works, like the more simpler programs that have like
easier.
Yeah, that have like record, stop, playback.
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit of like buttons that like will sweeten the sound a little bit.
Right.
Because once you get into the more like complex ones, they can be cumbersome.
Yes.
And intimidating.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So definitely pick the thing that's right for you in doing this. And if you're a person who likes simplicity, the great thing is you can do that really easily.
Yeah.
In whatever computer you're using.
Yeah.
So I guess that's a good start, right, for the single mic idea. What about graduating to the next level up where you have a few mics? Like, what does that look like? When you did your first, let's say not to the level of like, liking all these things really detailed ways, but like have you ever done something where you did like maybe 2 or 3 mics or something like that?
Yeah.
What does the next step look like for you?
And I feel like for me, it was definitely that having a single mic where it wasn't a Zoom recorder, but really it was a mic that was going into, some interface, some mixer. Once you have that mixer and it has other inputs open, then all of a sudden you start thinking, wow, for like cheap, I can get another condenser and throw something else up.
Yeah.
And that to me was, it added a lot, just a huge difference in sound.
Yeah.
Because now I could start really messing around with, just the overall like thickness of the sound. And, I didn't have to get so lucky with that one perfect placement.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Right? Now I can have 2 or maybe 3, whatever it is. But, that was for me, and that was basically mics going into a mixer.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we found in one of my bands when we were doing a demo that, the really tough part for us was kind of having the drums sound good and not overwhelm everything else when you're in a little space. And so being able to take a couple mics and like have, obviously the singer needed one. We could like have the singer on their own mic, have one that was, out in front of the drum set and, maybe one that we could hang in front of a guitar amp. Would be easier. And again, when you're starting out, these are the things that you learn, by doing a little at a time. Over the years, you can get much more sophisticated, but that level in between where you just use a few mics can be a lot of fun too.
Yeah.
So you mentioned, the mixer, right, as being like a real, like that
Right.
is kind of that's the step that kind of takes you to the next level where you can plug a bunch of things in at once.
Right.
And kind of, maybe you can EQ each one a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
You can make sure the input is at a good level, and,
Yep.
and you're going to be able to like have some idea of what that's going to sound like as it's going to the computer.
Right, exactly. And I think for, like I think if I remember specifically, I would have the bass amp would be placed pretty close to the bass drum
Yeah.
because those are my low end. So I wanted to kind of capture those in one
Together.
piece. One was going above the drum kit, and then the other one was really pointed toward vocal mics and the guitars.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this way I had, sort of like compartmentalizing like the
like
different
you had your-
sound areas.
Yeah, like you had your low end, you had your thumpy parts here, you had like your mid range kind of here, and then maybe something to get the high end or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's when I started that is when I realized like it can get a little bit complicated because you can't just take like any old passive mixer
Yeah.
and then just like plug it in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because most don't record most don't send multi-tracks out,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
They sort of give you like an out
You get a
whichever
signal.
way. You get a
right?
signal.
Maybe left and right if you're lucky.
Maybe left and right. Yeah. And from that point you had to you have to figure out like those levels
Yeah.
and then kind of hope that they're all going in at the right, together.
Yeah.
You're kind of like predetermining that.
Yeah.
It's not like you can go in later and then edit each track.
Yeah, absolutely. And so nowadays, I mean, we have a lot more choices
Right.
available. There are mixers out there that you can attach to your computer straight away with a USB or with Thunderbolt or
Yep.
Firewire or something. Actually, Firewire's not even really a thing anymore, but used to be.
It's called something else now too.
Well,
like
they used to. It used to be on all the systems, but
Yeah.
nowadays it's all like Thunderbolt and USB,
Thunderbolt,
essentially.
yeah, and USB, and they have USB 3,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, USB 3 nowadays and Thunderbolt 2. I think they're
Mm-hmm.
on. But in any case, these are all like the types of interfaces that you can plug something into
Mm-hmm.
your computer. And so they make mixers nowadays that you can easily plug in like that. But
Mm-hmm.
I would say if you're going to that point, then just
Right.
as cheap an option and
Yep.
as flexible an option is something like a digital audio interface.
Right.
And these can go, you could spend as little as $49 on some of these.
Yep.
And they may only have like a single input or like one mic and one guitar, and that's all
Yeah.
they do. You can go from that, and they kind of step up
Mm-hmm.
in ranges. And the nice thing about this is you can usually find something to fit just about any budget. So you
Right.
might spend $49 on a bare budget, like it only has one input. You can really only use it for something like I'm going to do an acoustic demo of myself,
Right.
right? All the way up to, okay, here's like, as we step up, maybe the next one up has like 2 inputs.
Mm-hmm.
The next one has 4 inputs. And then
Yep.
it has a couple different output options. And then maybe the next one has like 6 or 8. And as you go up, they don't get that expensive.
Right.
Like you got your $49 to $99 category. And then you got like, okay, the next level up is going to be like $179 or $199. And the next one up is like $299 to $399, something like that.
Yeah.
Right. So whatever your budget is, you can find something in that area.
Right.
And the great thing about those is, the interface plugs right into your computer. And so again, if you're using like, you probably want to be using something for these,
Mm-hmm.
like GarageBand,
That's right.
or something like that, where you can actually get each of those inputs is going to come in on its own track.
Yep.
And then you can decide later how you want to mix them together, right? Like, the drums are really loud. The vocal isn't quite as loud, but you can bring the drums back a little, bring the vocals up, and now you're going to have a much easier to understand recording. It's still live and it's still you, but it's just going to sound a little better to the listener.
That's right.
So I really like the idea of using an interface for anything more than just that like one and done thing.
Right.
It's like you might as well practically.
Yeah, I guess that's my point is like, and I know once we start talking about multiple mics, it is a huge difference from using the single mic.
Yeah.
But once you get there, now you get into an equipment issue.
Yeah.
And then once you're there, and you cross that path, then it's like, oh, now you've got problems. Now, well, an addiction.
You have an addiction.
Yeah. Now
It's
this is a
another
new
thing
thing.
you can-
Now
yeah.
you're no longer just a bass player. You're a bass player and a guy that really likes sound.
Yeah.
And
And that's kind of it. That's kind of it. Like you go over that threshold
Mhm.
and
No
now-
turning back.
Yeah. Now you're, now you're part of this whole, like a whole new world of recording. And, it's a lot of fun.
To me, like this is a very practical piece because I think really for both of us in our experiences, we're both the musicians that are not only the bass player, not only like backup vocalist, right?
Yeah.
Like another thing you can add into your tool bag, but also the ones that can record.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's not every.
Not everybody. Yeah. Not every guy is going to have that.
That's right.
Have that
And you bring that to the table.
in their back pocket.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it really is helpful to be able to do that sort of thing with a band because you can have really talented folks and they just don't know how to get it captured. And if you start to work with this stuff, it is, like you said, it's one more thing that you have. It is something that you can sell as part of the whole package.
That's right.
Right. That you bring to a band or you bring to a gig or whatever the case may be.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the point. I think that we realized that this is a pretty big, topic and we're definitely going to overshoot our time. So maybe that's a good place to stop for today. We are going to be back next week with more of this discussion because I think we wanted to get into more of the complex idea of like how do you get from that point, like these, just a few mics, like the single and maybe a few multi-miking up to like, oh, we're going to really we're going to do it up big time. We're going to, mic up drums and everything else and multi-track it and all that sort of stuff. And I think the other thing is we still need to give people, I think there's some tech tips on how to make sure you're getting the best signal and sound into your recording, right?
That's right. Yeah, because it involves a lot more, but if you're already there, like you can cross that line and get to that point, but it just requires a lot more information.
Yeah. I think then we're able to get into one shot here. So
cool.
Yeah, we'll be back next week, I think, with some more on making a quick and dirty demo, maybe getting from the quick and dirty to maybe the not so quick and not so dirty either.
Yeah.
Like maybe a more complex and slower but cleaner demo process, right?
Less quick, cleaner.
Yeah, so we'll definitely be back next week with that. I hope that you've enjoyed the first half of what we presented here on demos and that you will turn on some of your musician friends to it, right? You can subscribe to the podcast really easily on podcasts on your Apple device, on iTunes, on your macOS device, on Google Play Music, on just about any device, and Stitcher Radio on any platform. Basically, any podcatching app that you have out there, you can do a search for Practical Bass and find our podcast. And when you do, we hope that you will subscribe. And what that's going to do is it's going to give you a new copy will show up in your app every week, fresh and hot off the press. And we never charge for this. It's 100% free now and always. And we hope that you'll enjoy it and pass it on to others. If you have some feedback that you'd like to offer us at any time, we love to get mail from people on things that they've heard or things they picked up, or ideas that you all have or topics you would like to see us touch on in this podcast. We'd love to hear from you. You can find us through the contact form at practicalbass.com or just email us at podcast@practicalbass.com. And Dave and I check all that email the moment it comes in. We'd love to hear from you guys. So we hope that we will. And you can also find us on all the socials, of course, Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, Google Plus. We are out there. If it's out there, we're out there. And we look forward to hearing from you. So until next week when we talk a little more about demos, I'm Paul Fields.
I'm Dave Guzman.
And this has been Practical Bass.
Thanks for listening. Yeah. Sushi?
I'm like
Sushi?
I'm like, you know, Kill Bill. You remember Kill Bill? Where
Right.
like the bride, like her character, she shows up and and she's pretending not to be able to speak Japanese to the guy in the sushi bar.
Right.
She's like, oh, I know arigato.
Right.
And she's like, I know domo. And then she says, did I say arigato already? And that was it. And then like 2 minutes later, after the hood has come off, like, you know, she's revealed
Right.
what she's there for, and then she starts just like speaking fluent Japanese. You say arigato like we say
Yeah.
arigato.